Hi, my name is Barry Rosen, and this is our first class, the Essential Vargas. Um, this is actually a real class, and there are actually people that have registered, and the material in this is actually needed to kind of get an understanding of Vargas. So one of the things I've understood over the last um, couple of years is that the first class, is important. It's kind of the ocean in a drop, and it contains the essential principles of the entire class, and then the class kind of unfolds from there. And I decided to always make the first class free and available, and it basically is the best sneak preview, and you also can learn a lot. So what I hope that we'll learn today, for those of you who don't know that much about Vargas, is that we'll learn some of the basic principles of how they're different from the natal chart, and we'll learn a little bit more concrete. So we'll learn a little bit about Navamsha and Dishamsha, so that we have something kind of concrete in the class. I do have a lot of abstract principles to teach. I'm not sure I'm going to go through all of them because they can get a little abstract, but I do have them ready to present depending on how things go. Usually, I usually like to lecture, and then I will pause for questions and go to webinar. I think you can type questions under the questions. I can unmute you, but usually when we have these big promos, and there were about 49 people that signed up for the promo. If people don't remute themselves, there's a lot of background noise that goes into the recording. So I think there's a little hand signal. You can sometimes raise your hand, and I can unmute you when we have time for questions. So that's kind of our logistics. I'm going to unmute Afi. Afi, can you just see my face when you see the title, the Essential Varga class?
Yes, I can.
You can see my face and the slideshow.
Yes.
That's cool. Okay, yeah. Great. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so I usually start. Here's my contact information. I can be reached at barry@appliedvedicastrology.com. My office number is listed here at 928-284-5740. On Skype, I do respond at Barry Fort. On Facebook, you probably know me as Barry Rosen, or Astro Yoga, or Spiritual Astrology, or Vedic Astrology classes by Barry Rosen. So those are all available. And if you go to my website, appliedvedicastrology.com, you can sign up for our newsletter. Most of you probably are getting it. It is free. It does come out weekly with the best of my columns for those of you who aren't on Facebook. So I usually start our classes with some Vedic prayers. They often allow us to kind of settle into sattvic energy to receive knowledge. So we'll just do a little chanting to begin. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha. Vakritunda Mahakaya, Surya Koti Samabraha, Nirvigyam Kurame Deva, Sarvakareshi Sarvada. Jnanamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Padam, Mantramulam Guru Vakyam, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Sahana Bhavatu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvina Vatitamastu Ma Vivishai Vahai, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Aditaye Samaye Mangale Buddhaye Cha, Guru Shukra Shani Bischa, Rahuve Ketave Namaha. So honoring the great ones, Lord Krishna, Goddess Saraswati, Vedavyasa, cognizer and writer of the Vedas, and my tradition of the Holy Masters going back to Brahmananda Saraswati. I stand on the shoulders of many great teachers, particularly Sanjay Ra, Noel Sutton, and Bill Levacy, have influenced my work the most. I'm going to go through classmates. I do want to tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me, I've been involved in Vedic astrology since 1987, 1988. I I first started teaching Vedic astrology classes maybe in 1990, but they were more oriented as beginning Vedic astrology to get people ready to understand financial astrology. For many years, I specialized in mundane astrology and financial astrology, and then the last 5 years, I've been moving more into spiritual and psychological astrology. Um, I've been teaching online now for about 4 or 5 years, and I try to specialize in, I call them boutique classes. I don't like teaching beginning astrology, um, but there's a call for me to do it at some point. But I tend to kind of go into kind of very specific realms. We just finished a class on blind spots and the hidden things in people's charts, and we did a class on relationship. We've done a class on finance. And so very, very involved, in very kind of specific topics. And so my goal with the Varga class is to is to help us go more microscopic. Obviously, two people born on the same. I have a friend. He's kind of a soul brother. We were both born on the same day in the same city. About 20 hours apart. So we have a lot of deep qualities in common, but obviously we're very different people. Not only because of the rising signs, but because of other, very specific energies. We do share a lot of common threads just because of the planets that were where they were that day. But when we study Vedic astrology, it's kind of like studying strands of DNA. Obviously people are very unique. They have very specific karma, and you don't see it in the main chart, in the Rashi chart. But when you go deep in the chart, you find you see that that you see the strands of the DNA. So my goal also always in teaching astrology is like, how can we get deeper? How can we be more specific? The client walks in with a blue shirt, and let's say he's Aries rising, and you tell him he's competitive and he's he's into his career, and you're not really he's got a blue shirt, but if you tell him he's got he's very creative and he's very if you tell him something that it's not there, because of the nakshatra that he's in Aries, and because of the pada that he's in the Navamsha chart, and because of the degree he's in the D60 chart, then you start getting more microscopic. So that's always my goal. This class, we'll start meeting next week. We will continue with kind of rules of Varga, which is kind of our overview for those of you who just choose to sign up for it. I'm going to be visiting my dad the following week, so you get a break to kind of study on your own. I usually give you extra videotapes to watch. And then we'll spend 3 weeks on Navamsha and 2 weeks on Drekana. Navamsha, everybody always tells us how important it is, but then they often don't tell us why. And so, we easily can spend 3 weeks on it. And in Jaimini astrology, it really can, I'll show you some of that today. You can really get into the depth of a person's purpose on the planet, when you rotate the Navamsha chart. It's very possible. Drekana, is very important. It's a third of the, it's dividing the chart into 3, and even the Westerners talk about the Decante. And it has a lot to do, there's a lot of things that it brings up about health, and it's more than just brothers and siblings. It's, there's a lot more there. There's, it's Varga, the third house. We will spend a whole day on career, in the D10 chart, and we could easily spend 2 days on that. I'm going to be doing a couple classes on the D60 chart. And the D60 chart is the chart that changes every 2 minutes. It's it's used to kind of rectify twins, but Parashara tells us it's one of the most important charts, and no one ever uses it because you have to have the chart perfectly rectified. But it's actually more important than the Navamsha chart, and it's very, very revealing. It actually shows all our collective karma, and it also tells us about our past lives. So very interesting chart, and we're going to spend 2 classes on that, something I'm kind of fascinated by. And then we will do the D4 and the D7. The D4 is connected to property, and the D7 to children. Okay, for those of you, do a shameless plug here. I do have a new book coming out in a couple of weeks, and for those of you I know who've ordered it, it's my editor's parents and grandparents got sick, and so I just have a new editor working on the book, and we're finalizing it, and it will be available by October 15th for sure, if not a week sooner. But it's um, it's called Looking Up the Magician's Sleeve, Using Astrology to See Your Blind Spots and Illusions, Spiritual, Emotional, and Psychological Wisdom to Guide You Through the Realms of Fear and Illusion. So it's a number of articles that I've written. For those of you who just like to read short little tidbits, it's got probably 100 little articles in it. And I've added a lot of new material. I have a whole section on Secret of the Houses, which is over 15 articles, and I've added a lot of new material. It's very kind of exciting. It's available on my website. So this class will have the next class next week. The class actually goes until around January 13th, and that's because we hit the holidays. You've got a couple of weeks off around Thanksgiving that we have to do, and a couple of weeks off we have to over Christmas that we have to do. So class will actually lead all the way into January 13th, but it's actually 11 classes over 15 weeks. Do some time to integrate the material. It will be on Sundays, the previous today, from 2:30 to 4:30. That's my prime time to be teaching, and the tapes are available for replay on Dropbox if you can't come at that time. In January, I'll be teaching a course on the spiritual essence of Vedic astrology if you're looking for my upcoming courses, and just trying to go much deeper with the spiritual essence of Vedic astrology. So we'll be looking a lot at Deities and Deities and the D20 chart for spirituality in that class, as well as connecting Vedic astrology to Patanjali and spiritual practice. Next year's classes, Nakshatras Part 2, Relationship Part 2, probably Vargas Part 2 will be there next fall. Obviously, we're only doing the first part of the Vargas. Okay. Those of you traveling, you can like to go to conferences. I will be speaking at the Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference and speaking on Friday, November the 30th at 8 a.m. on the Secrets of the Third House. So I'm going to come meet me in person. Okay. So let's start with our material here. So again, like any of us, I didn't make any of this stuff. I always make any of this stuff up. My talent is being able to be coherent and to present material, to write well, and to teach coherently, and that's what I try to do. I don't think Vedic astrology should be on this obscure topic that we have to spend a month to kind of understand a chapter. And it was like that for me when I first began, because there were no teachers around. So I'm always trying to make the material user-friendly. But I stand on the shoulders of great people like Camilla Sutton and her lectures. G.K. Gohl has, if you need to buy one book, you want to buy his Varga book. Hank Friedman has a great article on the difference between Vargas and the Rashi chart, which we'll talk a little bit about today. And Sanjay Rath has a great book on Vargas called Varga Chakra. And all these go into my knowledge. So anytime we're dealing with Vargas, we have to kind of get rectification right. So one of the first things we'll do next week, and I can't do it today, I'll probably send people who sign up for the class an extra hour videotape I have on rectification, is to get the chart rectified. I have, most people are afraid to use Varga charts because they think, if you're off a minute or two, you're going to mess them up. And sometimes that's the case. But, the D10 and the D9, the Navamsha and the Dashamsha chart maybe change every 10 to 13 minutes. The D60 chart changes every 2 minutes. So I was taught a technique to rectify the D60 chart. And if you have your birth time right within about 10 minutes, we can easily rectify it to the exact minute or 2 minute period using this technique. And I'll teach that to you next week. And it does, once you feel confident about your Varga chart being correct, you can get a lot of information about it. So I do use mean nodes in the Varga system, and I actually like true nodes in transit, but all my teachers have pointed out that a lot of the advanced dasha calculations and are connected to the mean node system, and I've finally come to kind of use me nodes in the Varga charts. So we went over what we're going to be doing in the class, and we went over the schedule. So on a very simple basis, even if you don't know a lot of Vedic astrology, there's some very simple things you can do with Varga charts, even if you don't choose to study them. So the first thing we look at in a Varga chart is the rising sign of the Varga chart and where the Lord of that chart is. And that's the most important thing in that chart. And that we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll give you some examples. The other thing that you can quickly do with Varga charts, if you've got the chart rectified, is that the Dasha Lord in any Varga chart will show you what area is going to be challenging during that dasha and what area will be fruitful in that dasha. So in Varga charts, you don't want planets in the 3rd, 6th, 8th, and the 3rd house is not just a neutral house anymore. It's actually considered a difficult house. So you can quickly go through all your Varga charts, for your dasha lord, and just see, are they in 3, 6, 8, or 12? And that area of life may be more fruitful or suffer during that time. And obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. And then you always look at the karka for the Varga. So Jupiter is the karka for children, and if you're looking at the D7 chart for children, you obviously always look at Jupiter. So we'll learn some of those basic things. But one of the things I'll give you an example. I mean, you can go to Sri Jyoti Star, which is the program that I use, and you can pull up the page for Vargas, and it'll give you all the Vargas. Now, for some reason, it's doing them in Northern. I've actually been switching to Southern lately, but for those of you. And so here, this is my chart. I was born March 15th in Chicago. And let me shrink this. So these are all the Varga charts, and we'll explain what they all mean in a minute. But you could quickly, one of the things that you want to look at, if you've read my articles on signs, usually if you have anything with Scorpio rising or Aquarius rising, it brings more karmic challenges. Whereas Taurus brings the grace of Krishna, and Libra brings the grace of Lakshmi, and there's certain qualities that even the rising signs have. So you can quickly look at your rising signs in all the Varga charts and see, okay, my Navamsha chart is ruled by Taurus, and it's got Venus in Taurus and an exalted moon there. So it immediately, even if you didn't know anything about Vargas, you would say, oh wow, that's powerful. And it's true. I've been very blessed with spiritual practice, and I'm very kind of devoted in that way. And you can just see Taurus. At the same time, and the other thing you could look at very quickly is, okay, I'm in a Rahu Mahadasha. So you could look at Rahu in any area of life. So in my Navamsha chart, Rahu is in the 10th house, and it's exalted in the sign of Gemini. So it's gaining strength by being in the 10th house, which is one of the places you want Rahu for elevation and career. And it also is exalted here. And it is conjunct Venus and Saturn, so that does create certain problems, but it's very powerful. You could also look, so you could go through and look at your dasha lords in all the Varga charts, and for even just looking at my Vimshamsa chart, which is connected to spiritual practice, I've got Rahu with Jupiter and Ketu here, which suggests that maybe I would be. Anytime you have Rahu in the 9th house, you're going to be a little bit, the 9th house is going to be connected to Guru, and I've got Jupiter debilitated here, and I've got Rahu, which is kind of a rebel. You don't want Rahu in the 9th house because it wants to rebel against Guru, and I have to admit, my Rahu period, I have not been as devoted as I have been in other periods to Gurus, and you can see that coming up in the Rahu period. So you can quickly just go through all your Varga charts and look for what's the dasha lord doing? Is he in good houses, or is he in bad houses? And you can look at what sign is being owned, and it's kind of very revealing. And then the other basic thing is the planets in the Navamsha chart. I'm sorry, the planets in the rising sign obviously have the most influence. So you're always looking in the Varga charts for where's the Lord of the chart placed, and what does that tell you about the chart. And then you're always looking for what planets are in the first house in any Varga chart. So my Navamsha chart, I've got Mars in the first house. Navamsha is a little bit more specialized, but usually you don't want a malefic planet in your Varga chart ascendant. It usually causes problems. You certainly want a benefic there. But the big thing you always want to look at in a Varga chart is where's the chart lord in any chart. So my D10 chart, Virgo rising, for career, has Mercury in Pisces. So the Lord of the chart has Mercury in Pisces, but it's with an exalted Venus. So the debilitation is canceled, but it still kind of creates problems. I mean, I've been very fortunate in career, but at the same time, I still have some of these problems. I have deep communication problems sometimes with people that I work with because of the debilitated Mercury in this chart. So that's kind of a quick overview. But anyway, if you don't know anything about Vargas, that's the first thing you look at. What where are the rising signs? Where's the Lord of the rising sign? And we'll go into this in more detail. So the other thing, like I said, is that you look at the karakas for Vargas. There's always a key planet to each Varga, and we'll learn them all. But obviously the D9, which is about relationship, we would look at Venus and Jupiter. Jupiter for a woman's chart for husband, Venus for a man for his wife. The D4 chart, which is connected to property and material comfort, we would look at Mars for property and Moon for the mind. And in the D3 chart, which is connected to siblings, the karaka for siblings is Mars. So we'd always look at Mars in the D3. In the D10, we would look at Mercury for karaka for work and the Sun for karaka for status. So again, this is not a complete list. It's just to give you an idea of how you look at Vargas. And then there's a key house in every Varga chart that you focus on. So you always look at the ascendant and where the ascendant lord is placed. That's the most important thing in any Varga chart. And then you look at the key house in each chart. And it's easy to remember, obviously, in the D10, which is connected to career, you look at the 10th house. And in the D12, actually, you look at the 12th house, believe it or not, connected to parents, but it's actually has deeper values. In the D3, which is directly on which we'll study, you look at the 3rd house. So in the D9, you look at the 7th house because it's about relationships. So there's always you're always looking at the ascendant and the key house and the karaka, and those are kind of a key principle that you always look at. More advanced studies, for those of you who know Jaimini astrology, you can also look at the Charakarakas. So for those of you who know Jaimini astrology, and we will learn a little bit in the class because I can't live without it, the Darakaraka, which is the planet with the lowest number of degrees in any chart, is also a planet for your spouse. And so if you're looking at the D9, you have to look at the Darakaraka also. And the Darakaraka, like if we look at my chart, my Darakaraka is the sun because it's at 1 degree Pisces. And so we have to look at the sun in my Navamsha chart to see some more qualities about my wife that we might not see. And that's kind of very revealing. And then we always look at the Atma Karaka, which is the planet that governs our soul in all the Varga charts, because it tells us the soul lesson of the in that Varga. So another thing that we always look at in every Varga chart is the Atma Karaka. So my Atma Karaka, as you know, is the planet with the highest number of degrees, and it gives my Atma Karaka is Saturn. So we look at Saturn in all my Varga charts to see what my soul lessons are. Again, for those of you who understand the Atma Karaka, it often creates the most challenges in our life because that's the area that we need to grow in most. So if Venus has the highest degrees in your chart, and Venus governs relationship, then it very well may be that that you're going to grow most through relationship issues. And even though if Venus is afflicted or poorly placed in your chart, then you may have big ups and downs around relationships your whole life. But it's how your soul is growing, and that's what you've chosen to do. My Saturn Atmakarka means I always grow through work and through my relationships with my employees, and it's always the biggest lesson in my life. And it's always a struggle, but that's what the Atmakarka does. It gives you challenges to grow. So always look at the Atmakarka in the Varga charts, and you can look at all the other chart karkas for you know them. I don't want to go into this because it's too. We can do that sometime. Just to kind of give you an overview, and I will go over. I should probably do this next, but sometimes it's hard to go back. So the general rules for Varga charts, for the most part, we can't always treat Varga charts the way we treat regular charts, and I see people doing this all the time, which is why I'm doing this class. So one of the techniques that you can't do in a Varga chart is like people will, in a Rashi chart, you get a lot of information when you look at where the Lord of the chart is placed. So if the Lord of the fourth is in the eighth, then you're going to have trouble with mother or property or something like that. In the Varga charts, you can't do that because the houses mean different things. So that's one of the things you can't do in a Varga chart. You can look at key planets in the 3rd, 6th, 8th, and 12th houses, but you don't want to play this game of Lord of the 4th and the 12th, or the 3rd and the 9th. That doesn't work in Varga charts. So we won't be doing that in the chart. The most important thing about Varga charts is that the Rashi chart has to kind of promise something. Because if the Navamsha chart is good and the Rashi chart is not good for that thing, it won't manifest. There'll be a promise of it. So sometimes you get, let's say, in my chart, I have Lord of the 5th and the 8th, and I have Jupiter in the 8th. So I don't have any children in my life because I've got Jupiter in the 8th. If my D7 chart had all kinds of good things for children in the chart, it may mean that I have a strong desire for children. I have, which I did, but it won't manifest because the Rashi chart isn't promising it. So we always have to start with the Rashi chart whenever we look at something, and then we go to the Varga chart just to get the microscopic information. Once in a while, the Rashi chart is neutral or negative. And then the Navamsha, and the Varga chart is, kind of uplifts it, and that's kind of how you get more details out of it. The other thing that's kind of problematic in Varga charts is aspects, and there are different schools of thought and different teachers who teach different things. My experience is that conjunctions are very crucial in Varga charts because they're the planets are very kind of close to each other. I often look at trines and oppositions, but if I were to look at a Saturn sextile or Mars square, it's kind of questionable. When you start learning the way that Varga charts are divided into multiple segments, you can't start kind of playing with aspects that way. And this is controversial. I see people doing that all the time. My experience is it's simpler to kind of look for malefics in certain places and to look for conjunctions and trines and oppositions. One of the things that I have realized, even late in my years, is that if you have like a conjunction in the Navamsha chart, you might have an exact trine of those planets in the Rashi chart. So, for example, if let's say you had Jupiter at 1 degree Aries and you had the Sun at 1 degree Leo, in the Navamsha chart you would have Jupiter and the Sun conjunct in Aries Navamsha, and if you look closely at the chart you would have an exact trine there. So conjunction in the Navamsha chart will actually be showing you an actual trine that's happening in the natal chart, in the Rashi chart. So those things are kind of important. And then obviously dashas and transits are applicable to divisional charts. One of the things that we'll learn, which we won't learn today, maybe next week, is that transits do impact Varga charts. And for example, Jupiter is going to go into Scorpio in October for a whole year. So if you have Scorpio rising in any of your Varga charts, then Jupiter is going to be kind of bringing good luck and good fortune to that area of life, if it's promised in other parts of the chart. So there are things like that. You can do transits connected to the Varga charts. So for those of you, not familiar with all the Vargas, and there are other ones, but these are considered the essential ones. So obviously the natal chart is the basis of everything, but it does get overused too much. Sharing with people that there's so much more than just the natal chart, and if you just use it, you get the chart wrong. So we have to start with the natal chart because it creates all the other charts, but we also have to be open to looking elsewhere. The Hora chart connected to wealth. I'm not doing the Hora chart in this class. I will do it in Varga 2 class, but there are 2 or 3 Hora charts actually. The one that you usually see has all the planets in Cancer and all the planets in Leo, or that kind of thing. And it's it really also has a lot to do with the solar and lunar energies, the Adi and the Pingala energies of the nostril. So that's actually the best way to use that chart, which gets generated. There are other Hora charts that get generated that are more important. Drekina often gets talked about for siblings, but I'm giving a whole lecture on the 3rd house, and the natural 3rd sign of the zodiac is Gemini, which is a very kind of it means Mituna, which is the Sanskrit word, means copulation, and it's a very kind of sexual, creative house. And so the Drekina chart is certainly more than just siblings. It's about courage and power. It's also about sexuality. So it's why it's a much more interesting house. And there's a lot you can do with it in terms of health, and that's why we're going to spend a couple lessons on it. Chadar Shamsha is connected to homes, vehicle, and inheritance. People always want to know about more stuff, and you want to kind of you have to kind of learn how to use that chart. The Samtamsha, children and grandchildren. The Navamsha, spouse, hidden talents, and marriage. Most people are familiar with that, but there's so much you can do with the Navamsha chart. That's why we'll spend 3 lessons on it. Saptamsha, career, success, status, promotions. Vladashamsha, which we're not going to do, parents. But it's also a Varga of the 12th house. So there's a lot more to the Dwadashamsha than just parents, and that's why all these charts, traditional Vedic astrology kind of, looks at concrete things, but you really have to kind of always go deeper with the hidden meanings, even in the Varga charts. Shodashamsha, general happiness and movable assets. It's an octave of the 4th house. Vimshamsha, which is my favorite, and spiritual progress. We'll spend a lot of time on that in our class in the winter. Siddhamsha, academic achievements, but also higher wisdom. Bumsha, which is physical strength and weakness. It's a microscopic look at the nakshatras. Actually, you divide. To me, the Bumsha is quite fascinating because you divide the chart into 27 parts, and so every 1 degree in so many minutes you get another nakshatra energy. So, for example, my ascendant, is when you look at it more microscopically, my ascendant is an Anurata, but when I look at my ascendant microscopically, it's in Shadabhishak, and it's true. I have a lot of Shadabhishak subtle energy in my life. I'm very radical. I'm very much into healing, and so on the D27 can reveal a lot of microscopic energy there. The Trimshamsha, which is very important, which we're not going to get to this class, is showing misfortunes. The D40 and the D45 are connected to ancestral lineages, maternal and paternal lineages. So I'm very interested in ancestral karma. If you want to see what karma you've inherited from your grandparents, you look in those charts. And the D60, I said, is very key. Parashara, when you calculate the power of the charts. He gives the D60 the most energy for calculation. And it's very key because it shows past life karma, and it's an accumulation of all our past life karma. I mean, we only take so much past life karma in any one life on, but we, because you can see what we've chosen in this life, but we can see kind of our past life in the D60 and the kind of general patterns that we've accumulated. It's quite fascinating. So the D1 through D12 are more connected to the physical world. That's why they're, when people ask you about parents and children and money and, homes and stuff like that, you have to go to the D1 to the D12. But the other charts are very revealing. The D60 to the D24 are connected to the emotional body. The D27 to the D30 are connected to the mental body, and that's why they're very important when you're looking for, and very much into healing. And usually health problems start in the emotional and the mental body, and so you could see them in the other Varga charts more specifically. And I'm going to do a lot more research on this, but it's quite fascinating. Ancestral karma is very, very important. We're in the holiday season now where we honor our ancestors and go to the temple and we do offerings and stuff like that, because half the times some of the stuff that goes on in our life is not even our stuff. It's like we're working out our ancestors' karma. And I've told this story before. I had a client, and his parents, her parents had been very involved in the Pakistani-India War in 1947 to 1948. And during that time, there was a lot of carnage. And in fact, her parents were deeply connected to killing over 200, Muslims. And that was kind of a huge karmic debt, and it was impacting her life. And so we had to have some ancestral karma yagas done to release that, because you can imagine if you get 200 angry Muslims, who are not happy that they were slain, it's impacting the next generation. So ancestral karma is quite fascinating. We're not going to study it in this class. The D60 we talked about a little bit. I'm going to see if I can take a little breath here. If you have any questions, let's see. I see one question here. You can type them in. I am meeting VP Goals book on Vargas. I remember VP. I remember Goals article being initials being VP. I've got the book here. I thought I had it here. Yeah, it is VP Goal. So if there's one book that you want to have in your library as a Varga reference book, you want VP Goal's book, Comprehensive Predictions by Divisional Charts. Yeah. And it's kind of encyclopedic. He's absolutely the master of this material. But the book is readable. I mean, one of my challenges with Vedic astrology books is that sometimes you have to spend a month to figure out a chapter, and it shouldn't be that way. So I'm always trying to make things easier. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So I wanted to give you a quick tour of the Navamsha chart. It's really the most important chart. And so I wanted to make this lesson. I've got all these abstract principles which are not kind of juicy to give a whole hour talk on. Some of that we'll do next week, and we try to bring in examples. I wanted to go deeper into the Navamsha chart, which and then probably I'll illustrate it with my chart just because I can do that quickly, and I should use a famous person that I just haven't had time to prepare. So the first thing that when we look at the Navamsha chart is that we want to look at planets in the 1st, 5th, and 9th houses in the Navamsha chart, because the planets in the 1st house tell us what talents we were born with. So Jupiter in the first house in the D9 will make you a natural teacher or counselor. You were just born with that gift. I've got Mars in the first house in my D9 in Virgo. So it makes me it shows that I've had military strategy lifetimes. And, I've used that energy to be kind of practical and strategized, in business for people. And that energy, it also shows that, I have a lot of warrior lives. And you can see that also because I have Mars and Aries in the sixth. So, so the planet in the D9, in the first house in the D9 is very important because it shows you the natural talents that you've inherited. The fifth house in the D9, you always look at the trines in the D9 first. So it shows you the talents that we grow into later in life. Maybe they come up in our college years. So let's say you have Venus in the fifth house in the D9. So maybe by your college years, you're kind of really picking up, bringing out your musical talents or your artistic painting talents or something connected to Venus. And then the planets in the ninth house in the D9 represent the talents for which we need a teacher or guru to guide us. So I have Jupiter in the ninth house in Taurus in my D9. And Taurus, when I really kind of realized this was very deep, because Jupiter in Taurus is, doesn't have dignity. Taurus is a very material sign, so it means I more of a material guru. And at some point in my life, in my 30s, I met a man who taught me a lot about the financial markets, and he was my Jupiter in the ninth house in Taurus, and he brought out all these qualities that created my career, being a financial counselor and being an investor. But it was something that I needed to learn. I needed a guru. So whatever planet you have in the ninth house in the D9 represents the talents that you need to bring out. So the rising sign of the D9 will reveal our hidden personality. So if you have Scorpio rising so I'm Scorpio rising, but I'm Virgo rising in the Navamsha chart. And the more I get to know myself, the more I realize I'm so much more Virgo rising. Everything in my life is writing and communication and teaching and service and healing. The more I kind of understand the rising sign of my Navamsha chart, which is connected to Virgo, which is about service and healing. I'm too much of a perfectionist. The more I kind of understand my hidden personality, the first house, rising sign of the first house. So I think we get too caught up in our Rashi chart rising sign, and it may tell us a lot about our physical body and our appearance, but our inner personality may be more seen in the first house in the Navamsha chart. And I am a perfectionist. I'm a strategic businessman. I'm very analytical. Those are not things that you would describe to Scorpio. I do have Scorpio qualities in me, but they're not. They're more pronounced when you look at the Virgo rising in the Navamsha chart. So the ruler of the rising Navamsha chart reveals more information about the soul's destiny. So this is kind of interesting. So one of the things that we'll learn, one of the major techniques with Varga charts, is that you always want to compare the relationship with the Rashi chart to the Navamsha chart, or the Rashi chart to the Varga chart. And if you get a movement of 6, 8, or 12 signs, or even 3 for that matter, because 3 is not a good number in the Vargas, you're out of sync. And there may be more difficulty in creating and manifesting those issues. So in my case, my rising sign is Scorpio, and my rising Navamsha is Virgo. So there's an 11 relationship, and there are difficult problems with 11s, but for the most part, we like 11s because they bring fulfillment of desires. But if your Rashi sign is, let's say my rising Navamsha were Gemini. So I'm Scorpio rising, and in my rising Navamsha, if my rising Navamsha were Gemini, there would be an 8 relationship, which would mean there would be more kind of sudden difficulties or need for transformation or more 8th house issues because there's an 8 relation between my rising sign and my Navamsha chart. So you always want to look, and this principle, which is we'll look at in the course next week, Rashi Tula and Bhava Suchika, is how signs are transposed from sign to sign and or from house to house in the different charts. It's a very important principle, and it's very revealing. We'll learn some techniques for dealing with that. So here's another example. Let's say if you're Pisces rising and you're Aquarius rising in the Navamsha chart. So that means you maybe were born about 25 degrees Pisces or something like that. There's a 12 relationship between your Rashi sign and your Navamsha sign, and so you might be even more reclusive and withdrawn and meditative in your life, and than if you were Cancer rising in the Navamsha chart. So you always kind of want to look at those kind of relationships. I'm getting a question here. Somebody was wondering, whenever there are no planets in the 1st, 5th, or 9th houses of the Navamsha chart, then we have to look at the lords and see where they're placed. It's always kind of the rule. Planets in a sign are more potent to bring results as a kind of a tenant in your house. If the house is empty, there's still a landlord, and you have to look at his impact. Good question. Okay, so the 7th house in the Navamsha chart reveals qualities about your spouse. So people who don't know Vedic astrology very well may look at the 1st house in the Navamsha chart, but you actually look, if you want to know about your spouse, you look at the 7th house in the Navamsha chart. So let's say you have Venus in the 7th house in the Navamsha chart. You may, and it has dignity like in Libra, Pisces, or Taurus. You may be attracted to very beautiful women who have a strong sexual energy in that, and that kind of, or if you have Venus in Virgo, there's no dignity in the 7th house, you may end up with a henpecking critical spouse, that kind of thing. So you tell a lot about your partners from the 7th house in the Navamsha chart. The 10th house in the Navamsha chart reveals what we love to do most with our free time, and it may incline us toward a specific career. I find this, so the sign and the planets in the 10th house in the Navamsha chart really are very revealing about, I look at many things for life purpose, but that's one of the things I look at because it's very revealing. And so let's look at my chart again. Chart pages. Okay, so here's my Navamsha chart, and I've always been, I struggled with writing when I was very young, but I've got my 10th house in my Navamsha chart is Gemini. And what is Gemini related to? It's relating to writing and teaching, and it's very creative. I've got 3 planets in Gemini, my Navamsha chart: Rahu, Saturn, and Venus. And if you just looked at my Rashi chart, it said Scorpio rising, Mercury in the 4th, you wouldn't see writer in this chart, but when you see 3 planets in the 10th house in Gemini in the Navamsha chart, it's saying writing, it's saying teaching, and my whole life has been about writing and teaching and communication. My friends who know me really well is I hate people that are not good at communication. I answer emails within 15 minutes. I look at my email all the time. I answer phone calls within 24 hours. But, and I can't tolerate people who just, never look at, can't respond. So people have always seen that I was into communications, but, it's not something you see in the Rashi chart, but it's very strong in other parts of the chart. I'll bring this up now since we're doing this. I will teach some geometry principles in the course. There are charts that some of you may know called the Navamsha and the Rashi chart. What you do is you take the Atmakaraka, which is the soul planet, so the planet with the highest degrees, and my Atmakaraka is Saturn here. And then that goes into the first house in the Navamsha chart. There's a whole way of reading this chart. This is a rotation of the Navamsha chart, but it makes the rising sign where the Atmakaraka is placed. So this is a very important chart, and we'll study a little bit of this in our third Navamsha class, because it's basically rotating the Navamsha chart around the soul planet, and it's a very important chart. It's very revealing. Again, what is it? Gemini. Okay, so then there's a chart that takes the Rashi chart and combines it with the Navamsha chart and creates what's called the Rashi chart, which is, to me, the most revealing chart about our purpose on the planet. And so what do we get when we combine my Rashi chart and my Navamsha chart? We get Gemini again, writer, communicator, teacher, Jupiter K2. Jupiter is, it's in Purnavasi Nakshatra. Jupiter is about teaching. K2 is about spiritual knowledge, teaching astrology. So what we get in my life purpose chart is that we get Gemini rising with Mercury in the 9th, again associated with higher wisdom, spirituality, and Jupiter and K2, connected to Jyotish and spiritual. I've been involved in teaching meditation and spiritual knowledge, 40 years, and I recognize that it is my highest purpose. But when I first started studying geometry astrology and playing with these charts and rotating them, you suddenly see, oh my God, it's right there. So very revealing chart. Okay. But anyway, the 10th house in the Navamsha chart will tell us a lot about what we're drawn to doing. And in my case, I've got Jupiter in the 10th house, drawn to teaching. In that particular chart that I showed you, drawn to teaching spiritual knowledge and wisdom. We can also use the D9 chart for rectification. I'll give you some easier rectification techniques, but your skin tone will change with a rising sign. So this is a particular problem because we live in the United States. We have so many cultures, and it's very hard for us to do this now. But so for example, I have Virgo rising in the Navamsha, which will give me olive tone skin, and I have very olive tone skin. And if I had Libra rising in the Navamsha chart, I would have very fair white skin. So you can the skin tone changes with every rising Navamsha, and it's kind of fascinating. So it's one way to rectify, but it's actually harder to do because you get people from mixed races, and then I always have to ask them. I have to say, like, would you, for your race, is your skin tone fair or is it dark or something like that? So, but it's interesting. It's interesting. The trinal houses in the D9 will also show us a deep dominance of our purpose in life. So those are called the Purusharthas, which are whether we're part of the warrior caste, which is connected to fighting for society, like policemen and politicians are part of the warrior class. Those are the fire signs: Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. The earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, are going to be connected to merchants and business people. The water signs are going to be connected to Brahmins, to the teachers of society, to the priests and the counselors and the guides, and then the air signs are connected to the people who are into relationship, to Kama. And those people are and connecting into pleasure. And so the signs that own your first, fifth, and ninth houses tell you something about your Purusharthas, about your aims of life. Although there's more deeper to that. I have a whole course on this if you want to pick it up on, called Multi-Dimensions of Reality. I'm really fascinated by how all this stuff works, and it's a little bit more complicated than I'm laying out here simply. So we always, and I just talked to you, I went over this already, we always want to look at the Atmakarka and the Navamsha chart, and then we can rotate the chart and see how that's placed. And that tells us a lot about our soul lessons. And we'll have a whole lesson on that, which is lesson 4 or 5 of the class. Now, so here's kind of a summary of the Navamsha chart. Myself up here a little bit. So the other thing is that houses in each Varga chart have different meanings. So you can't. Sometimes the meanings transfer, but sometimes they don't. So you have to. The hard thing about Varga charts is that you have to kind of learn, and you have to really have good notes, and you have to put it in a book or something. Is that you have to kind of remember that specific things in the Navamsha chart, for example, may have different meanings than you might think. So, for example, we said the first house, is about our inborn skills that we're born with. Put Mercury in the first house in the Navamsha chart, the person's a natural communicator, writer, particularly if it has dignity. So that first house we always look at the talents that we were born with from past lives. The second house can be the second spouse. It can be connected to money, which would be something you would think of as a second house. It also can be a house of breaking relationships. The third house in the Navamsha chart is connected to sexuality. Again, something that gets ignored. Gemini, third house, Matuna, copulation. Third house is very connected to sexuality. And when you're looking at sexuality in the Navamsha chart, you look at the 3rd, the 7th, and the 11th houses, and they will reveal the native sexuality and problems with it, or with it, or stuff, or whatever. Not too many clients will come to you and ask you about their sexuality, but you would look at the 3rd, the 7th, and the 11th houses in the Navamsha chart. The 4th house is very important in the Navamsha chart. It's connected to health. And you want benefics in the 4th house, but if you have malefics in the 4th house, it creates health problems. And they may come up during, obviously, their dasha period. I have Ketu in the 4th house in my Navamsha chart. And I do, there are other things for health problems in my chart, but certainly Ketu periods make me more vulnerable to health issues. It's because I have Jupiter aspecting Ketu. I always get a lot of support to deal with health problems. So Jupiter always brings grace in the Navamsha chart wherever it lands, or in any of the Varga charts. The 5th house in the Navamsha chart, we talked about things that we learn over time. The 6th house in the Navamsha chart, money from work. Who would guess? Well, obviously, 6th house is a work house it's one of the, for everyday work. You always look at the 6th house for routine and discipline. But in the Navamsha chart, the 6th house is money from work, something that you wouldn't think of. Again, a very specific thing that you wouldn't look at. And if you just said, "Oh, you have health problems," then that wouldn't be true. Okay, hold on. Having trouble tabbing today. I don't know this. Excuse me here. The 7th house in the Navamsha chart is the general nature of your first spouse. We talked about that already. If you want to know the type of people you're attracted to, you're going to look at the planets and in the 7th house, the sign owning the 7th house, where the 7th house Lord is in. We'll have a whole lesson on relationship in the 7th house when we do Navamsha. 8th house in the Navamsha chart is health issues. You don't want a lot of planets in the 8th house in the Navamsha chart. 9th house in the Navamsha chart. The third spouse is actually there, but also learned abilities. So I mentioned in my chart Jupiter and Taurus. I had a guru to teach me finance and needed one in order to kind of go into that field. 10th house in the Navamsha chart we talked about already. luck with money and how easily it will flow. Benefics give good fortune and malefics cause struggle. 10,000 in the Navamsha chart also shows our general life purpose and skill levels. I'm missing a K here. 11th house in the Navamsha chart, native sexuality and skills of the spouse. I mentioned that was one of the sex houses in the Navamsha chart. In the 12th house, luck with hospitals, doctors, retreats, ashrams, stuff like that. 12th house in the Navamsha chart also is we'll learn some special things about that in Germany. Again, I'm not going to go over this now, but here's, same thing. Every Varga chart has specific houses. If you want to know about bosses in your chart, you look at the 9th house in the D10. I always remember this one when I'm doing, people are asking about the careers, and I'll say like Saturn and Rahu in the 9th house in their D10 chart. I say, well, do you have a lot of friction with your bosses? And inevitably, whatever's in the 9th house in the D10 chart is going to tell you about bosses, and it's quite it works all the time. So, but they're all specific houses to look at in the D10, which will tell you things about when you're going to leave a job. Obviously, end of career is the 8th house. It's like, 8th house does create kind of thing. But leave of absence might be 12th house. It might not be loss of job. It just may be you need to take time off for disability or to take a break from work. There are different qualities to each of the houses in the Varga charts. So I'm going to been talking too much. Let me see if I can. Any other questions? Is there a Jiminy book that you can recommend? I think Mark Boney has written a lot of. I'm always searching for good books, and then I end up writing books because I can't find people that are really clear in explaining this material. So a lot of my classes now are going to become books. I have a couple tapes in my transit class on Jiminy astrology, which are very clear, giving you the basics of Jiminy astrology in 4 hours. I will probably include those in this class. My transit class is about 7 to 9 tapes for $125. You can certainly get it there. I don't know. Mark Boney has some readable books on Jiminy astrology, but I often find, these people who really understand this stuff, they can't write. My job, and my purpose in life, with the stationary Jupiter and Gemini, is to kind of teach clearly and to write clearly, and that's what I do. I can't think of another good Jiminy book that I could recommend. When I was really getting interested in Jiminy astrology, I had to really search all kinds of things and to kind of figure it out, because I couldn't, no one had written it down very clearly. Anyway, I'll keep thinking if I don't know another Jiminy book. Is the Sun a malefic in the Varga charts? We'll go over that in a minute. We'll go over some of the rules of Varga charts now, but and I will cover that. That's a good question. Friends and enemies are a little different in Varga charts. There's some special rules. I kind of don't want to overload you guys too much, because a lot of the stuff, there's this thing in which I do too much, which is called Jyotish overload, and basically we can only take in so much Jyotish. I really should have hour-and-a-half classes that go 16 weeks, but I end up doing 2-hour classes that go like 13 weeks, because I figure that people don't have the attention span to kind of stay with the class for 4 or 5 months. But we really kind of need to go slowly. So what I do in my classes is I send you the PowerPoints to study. You can ask questions about the tapes, about the material as I go through it in the classes, and then you inevitably have to listen to the class again, because there's only so much you can pick up in a class. It's in fact, I'm taking an advanced class on a subject that I don't know very much about, Parsifal, and Parsifal is the really kind of the Arabic version of the annual chart, and all the rules are different. The sun has, the moon has Digbala in the 3rd house. I mean, you see, you have to, and I just realized, you always have to go slow with new material, and I have to remember to slow down in my presentations for that reason. But it's kind of inevitably in classes, you have to take some time during the week, 2 or 3 hours during the week, to listen to the tape again, to study the material that I send, go over it, because it takes time to see. The first time you hear it, there's no way it all goes into the chip, into the memory. So, so your participation in the classes will become important. Okay. And how much you get out of the class is really dependent on how much time you put into the class. Okay, so let's look at some of the rules for I don't want to do too much because I don't want to overload you. But let's see what we can do here. So the first thing we have to remember in statistical accounting is that the first house in the Varga chart is the most important wordplay. So so let's say we're looking at it's a Leo rising in the D10 chart, and so that's owned by the sun. So what house the sun goes into is very prominent. Like I have colleagues who have like Leo rising in the D10 chart, and the sun's in the 10th. So it's getting Digbala, it's getting straight. So the person, immediately you're seeing in the Varga chart, the person's going to have great status and rise in their career. Put the sun in Libra in the 12th house in the D10 in the Varga chart. Well, obviously, they're not going to be seen in the 12th house. They're going to, they may work on teams, but they're going to have all kinds of 12th house frustrations. So we always look at where the Lord of the first house is placed in the Varga chart. Obviously, we want him in the Kendra houses and the trine houses. We don't want him in the 3, 6, 8, 12 houses. He'll be okay in the 2nd and the 11th houses. So that will tell us a lot about that information. Take the children's chart, the D7 chart. You put the Lord of the chart in the 8th house with a malefic. The person's just not going to have children, even if it's kind of promised in the natal chart, because the Lord of the Varga chart just is not, suggesting a lot of struggles or deep karma with it. So the first thing that we always look at, where is the first Lord placed? And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the sign may give you some coloration. Aquarius and Scorpio are always more karmic signs to deal with. Taurus and Libra are going to give more grace of the goddesses. Cancer is giving grace of Mother Divine. Leo gives grace of Shiva. Pisces gives grace of Saraswati. So you want more you want less Scorpio and Aquarius. You want more benefic rising signs in the office. You want to look at the Atmakarika in any of the Varga charts, because it will show you the soul's deepest karma in that area. So in my situation, let's see if I can. So I need to look at Saturn in all my Varga charts. So and it is very relieving. That means that I have deep soul issues in that area. So what's very notable in my Drekana chart, which is connected to siblings, I have Saturn in the 8th with Ketu. Okay, not a good combination. Ketu doesn't have any dignity, obviously, in Gemini. Saturn is kind of neutral there. I have very deep past life karma with my younger brother. He shot me in the past life, and he wanted to incarnate in my life so that he could make restitution. And he's always wanted me to be in his life, and I won't go near him because obviously I haven't quite given up the past. I've healed it after 60 years, but in the Drekana chart, Saturn, soul lessons, Mars, very karmic chart here. Anytime you have Scorpio rising, you have deep karma. So chart initially reveals I have a lot of deep karma around my siblings, and particularly, it's difficult for my soul to work out, and it's still working on it, I think, because the Atmakorica is in the 8th house here, afflicted by K2. So you can look at the Atmakorica in all the Varga charts and just see what it tells you. I have Saturn in the 11th house in my Navamsha chart for career, suggesting the gains and fulfillment of desires, and yet I'm always struggling. In some ways, I have a very blessed career. In some ways, I have deep karmic suffering in career also. So, you always want to look at the Atmakorica, and I have a lot of issues to worry about, learn in my Navamsha chart about career. Okay. You all know what Vargodama planets are. That's the same Rashi and the same Navamsha sign. So if you're born at 0 to 3 degrees Cancer, your ascendant's there, then you have Cancer rising and Cancer rising in the Navamsha chart. So anytime you have a Vargodama planet, it shows soul integration. It shows the ability to fulfill desires and deep soul integration. And when you do the Gemini charts, this really kind of comes through. You can kind of see planets with a lot of Vargodama planets. When you start rotating the Gemini charts, it means people are able to live their purpose on the planet. It's very powerful. There's also a thing called House Vargodama, which is not really talked about very much. So, in other words, if you have a planet in the 4th house in D1 and you have a planet in the 4th house in any Varga chart, then there's kind of House Vargodama. So I don't know if I have any of these. I can't give any examples, but this does show up. Again, it shows additional strength. What else do you study in the Varga charts? The Dasha Lord and the Subperiod Lord and the relationship to each other. So the main use of the Varga chart, people come to you and they say, well, what's my career like going to be in my Varga chart? Well, okay, first of all, is the career good in the natal chart? Let's say they've got Sun in the 10th in Aries, they're just a star at war. But then you go to they're in let's say they're in a Saturn period. What's their career going to be like in their Saturn period? Well, they've got Saturn in Aries in the 12th house in the Aries period. So suddenly you're saying, well, this Aries, this Saturn period that you're going into is kind of going to pull you out of career and make you more reclusive, and you may have some falls. So, you've got, again, in this case, if the Rashi chart is so strong, you're not going to have a big fall. But, let's say if the Rashi chart were neutral, Saturn, the Varga chart is very difficult, then you're looking at the Varga chart, you're seeing, okay, there's a problem. Other major rule about Varga charts is what's the connection between the D1 Lagna and the Vargesh. The Vargesh is a fancy name for the ruler of the rising sign. I don't like using these Sanskrit terms a lot. They get used in the books and you immediately turn them off. I mean, for my students in the Varga class, you're going to have to remember that the Vargesh is the lord of the rising sign in the Varga chart. It just but basically, what is the connection between the D1 chart and the lord of the Rashi sign? I talked about this before. If they have a 3, 6, 8, or 12 relationship, then they're out of sync, and we'll learn, there's a difference between what 3 means and what 6 means and what 8 means and what 12 means, and we'll learn those words. Those are rules of what I call transposition. When things move, do they move 2 houses, 3 houses, 4 houses? What does it mean? In any case, you want your planets more in sync, not in 3, 6, 8, and 12 relationships. Are there challenges or smooth karma as a result? So, I mean, anytime you get something going from the Rashi chart to a Varga chart and it moves 3, 6, 8, or 12, it has more challenging karma. It's not as smooth as if it moves to the 9th house or the 5th house in the Varga chart. you can, when you get more detailed, I'm not going to go into this rule now, it's too complicated, but if the Lord of the Rising chart in the Varga chart is the Atmakarika or a yogi planet or has special significance, then it obviously brings more impact to that area of life. There's a lot of work done on deities in the Varga charts. We could have a whole class on this. I will bring this in. I'm always trying to kind of modernize deities. I love looking at the deities in the D60 chart. There's 60 of them. And we'll definitely spend time on them. In the D10 chart, there are kind of 10 deities, and they give a lot of information about career, and we have to kind of learn to modernize them because, part of the challenge with Vedic astrology now is, you tell somebody, Shiva, and they immediately turn off and they think of a blue god. Well, Shiva, if we translate it, is connected to the transcendent, to the deep state of meditation where you kind of go into the Zen emptiness or oneness of and unity. And that's why he's depicted as blue, because he represents the infinity of our deepest innermost nature. So, you tell people Shiva and they they get turned off, but you can translate that into modern terms. The deep silence and oneness of meditation would be a modernization of Shiva. So we've got to modernize all these deities in Vedic astrology. That's what I'm working on for my class in January, and we'll bring that in whenever we do deities in the Varga class. But they're very revealing, and I don't have examples here, but the deities in the D10 chart tell us a lot about career. So basic rule, and you don't want planets in the 3rd, 6th, 8th, or 12th in a Varga chart because it blocks it. And when is that block going to manifest? During its dasha or subperiod. So you're in a Mars period. You've got Mars in the 12th house in the Varga chart. You're going to have problems during the Mars period in that area of your life. One of the things I always tell people is, people say, "Is my period going to be good?" Well, is the answer, look at the Varga charts. If Mars is if you're going into a Mars period and Mars is in good houses in all your Vargas and it has dignity, then all areas of your life are going to work in that Mars period. If the Mars period is promising in other ways, but that's really the case. Life is a mixture. You go into a period, your relationship falls apart, but you get promoted at work. You get, my Mars period, I was sick all the time. I had great income during that time. I had relationship problems. You can see that all in the Varga charts. And if you want to be specific with people, you've got to look at what's going on in the dasha period and all the Varga charts. I show you that at the beginning of the class. Transits impact Vargas. I told you about this. So Jupiter transiting into Scorpio in October will not only impact, you if you're Scorpio rising, but if you have Scorpio rising in any of your Varga charts, and how that will be impacted may, be very specific. Let's say you have Saturn's in Sagittarius now. If you have Saturn rising in any of your Varga charts, then Saturn is, maybe negatively impacting that Varga during this 2.5-year transit. There are other ways that transits work in Vargas. We'll have to learn those rules next week. You can study yogas in Varga charts, so Parivartana yogas, or something, all those wonderful yogas which are impossible to memorize, but they are significant in Varga charts. Combustion is very important. If it's in the natal chart, it kind of shows up in the Varga charts and causes problems. Marna Karakastana, which I've written an article about, it's in my almanac, those of you who have it, is lack of house dignity. It's the opposite of Digbala. So you want Moon and Venus in the 4th house because that gives dignity. Venus wants to be home. It loves the house. It loves to be to the high of the house. Everybody wants mother at home because it creates comfort and ease. So that's Digbala for the Moon. Moon has Marna Karakastana in the 8th house. So the 8th house is like Scorpio. The emotions are dry. One can't express the emotion. So there's a whole set of planets Marika Karkastana is the opposite of Digbala. And we look at Marika Karkastana in the Varga charts because it gives us more information. You don't want Jupiter in the 3rd house. You don't want Mercury in the 4th or the 7th houses. You don't want Saturn in the 1st house. You don't want Rahu in the 9th house. You don't want Ketu in the 4th house. You don't want the Sun in the 12th house. And you don't want the Moon in the 8th house. And you don't in the 7th house. So those are kind of bad placements by house, and that's called Marika Karkastana. And you look for those in Vargas. I have an article on that if you in my almanac, and I think it's going to be reprinted in my new book. Rahu and Ketu are very important in the Varga charts because they reveal deep karmic influences. So Rahu and Ketu in the natal chart, as you know, bring out karma, and often they're central karmic lessons for a whole lifetime. And you can, the first thing you can analyze if you only had a half hour in somebody's chart is tell them about Rahu and Ketu in their chart, and they would think you were brilliant. Rahu and Ketu in the Varga charts become very important also because they reveal the deep karma of that Varga chart. So you don't want them in the wrong houses, or you don't want them lacking dignity, or you don't want them afflicted because then they have deep karma there. Point 12, study natural malefics and their conjunctions and aspects. So usually in the Varga charts, you're looking at Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, and Mars causing problems. They're going to cause problems in the Kendras and the trines usually. And conjunctions with those planets are going to cause problems. So those are the type of things you look at when you're analyzing Varga charts. So I showed you my 8th house Drekina chart, where I have Saturn and Ketu in the 8th house. So I naturally have a deep kind of karmic issue with my brother, with my siblings, and it's going to come out in a Ketu-Saturn period or a Saturn-Ketu period. My brother tried to elect to kill me in my Saturn-Ketu period. I think he pushed me into the basement, and I hit my head, and they took me to the hospital, and then he taught me into putting he used to drown me at the beach and hold my head underwater, and he would have me stick my finger in the electrical socket. And he said, go ahead and do it. It's going to be fun. Saturn Ketu in the 8th, brothers. Jupiter and Vargas in conjunctions and aspects will offset malefic influences. So, Jupiter brings grace wherever it goes. So if you have a bad placement in your chart, Jupiter conjunction to it or Jupiter aspecting it, Jupiter trines will work in Varga charts, are going to help the situation. So I have health problems with Ketu in the 4th in my Navamsha chart, but Jupiter's aspecting it, I believe. Well, Jupiter's influencing it anyway. It's negated a little bit. Gemini aspects, I'm not going to talk about now. Vargotama is something that we learned in our basic Vedic astrology class. It means, same Rashi, same Navamsha. And we'll spend some time talking about this in the Navamsha class. But Vargotama is powerful unless it's ruined by the 6th, 8th, or the 12th house. So if you, and again, when you get these transpositions between charts, you've got to kind of look for these kind of subtleties. So, if you beginner's mistake, you say, oh, you've got Vargotama, but you look in the Varga chart, the planets in the 6th or the 8th or the 12th house, then the Vargotama is ruined. Again, the houses are more important than sign. Or Vargotama. So a house placement will ruin a Vargotama. Planetary war is always a really difficult thing in people's charts. It does come up 2 planets at the same sign. There are all these rules for it. It will show up in all the Varga charts because the planets are so close. Once in a while they'll separate, but if you get a planetary war in the Rashi chart, it's going to impact everything in all throughout all the charts. Sometimes you'll get a debilitated planet in the Varga chart, and it's said that would spoil the manifestation in that cycle. But as you know, there are all these rules for debilitation cancels, and they do apply in the Varga charts also. So the karaka for the divisional chart are always key. And I mentioned that earlier in the class. So you look at Jupiter in the children's chart D7, you look at Venus in the Venus and Jupiter in the D9 chart, you look at Mars and K2 in the D4 chart for property. You don't want the karakas in trick houses. So again, anytime you have 3, 6, 8, and 12, you're looking in the Varga charts, what kind of problems do I have? So let's say you're looking at the D4, which is connected to homes and property, and you're looking at Mars because it's the karaka. So you don't want Mars in the 12th house in the D9, in the D4, because it's going to cause problems with homes and property and maybe losses and expenses and things like that. So that's how you look at karakas. It's thought that if you put planets in the 3rd or the 8th house in the D charts, they're kind of death-like. So in general, when you're looking at your Vargas, you don't want planets in the 3rd or the 8th house. And again, here I'm emphasizing 3rd house. The 3rd house is not this, neutral house as it is in the Rashi. It's a problem house. And if you hear my talk in Sedona about the 3rd house, the 3rd house is very connected to kind of our primal urges. I mean, sometimes those are sexual, sometimes those are toward violence. It kind of is more connected to our reptilian brain. And so when you put planets in the 3rd house, sometimes they have no dignity or they're afflicted. They can bring out more of those reptilian brain qualities, kind of like those Lord of the Fly. If you know the book Lord of the Flies, these people get trapped and they end up becoming cannibals. So sometimes 3rd house stuff can, when it's very malefic, can be inherently negative. And then finally, there are what I would call unusual spoilers, and I'm not going to go into this, but there are all these, in anything you study in Vedic astrology, there are all these kind of funny rules that you have to know, otherwise you get killed. For example, the D9 chart, which is for spouse. Now you would think, put Venus in the 1st house in the D9, the person's going to have good relationships. The answer is it's kind of not true. You don't want Sun and the Moon in the D12 house for parents. Sun and the Moon obviously govern karaka for parents, father and mother. Mars in the ascendant in the D3, you don't want it. There's this rule in Vedic astrology called karaka bhavo nacha. So if a planet is too strong, it causes problems, and we need to kind of retranslate this. So, for example, Mars is the karaka for the 3rd house, connected to courage and siblings, right? If you don't want Mars in the 3rd house because it's like too powerful. It actually it becomes too aggressive. So natural rule would think, oh, I've got Mars in the 3rd house, it's in its own karaka house. Wrong. It's too powerful. There's the same thing in the Varga charts. You put Venus in the ascendant in D9, it's too powerful. It may be too sensual. It may be too sexual. It may cause problems because it's too powerful. And that's kind of the rule. I call it the unusual spoiler rule. And then you get these yogas, which are called Papakatari or Shubhagatari yogas. Whenever you have planets boxing in another planet, it can be good or bad. So basically, if you have Venus in the 2nd and Jupiter in the 12th, whatever you have in that lagna, is surrounded by 2 benefic. It's uplifted. That's called a Shubhagatari yoga. It's called a scissors yoga. And that uplifts that planet. You don't want malefics around a planet. For example, my moon, example, my moon is in Scorpio, where it's not real happy, but I have a Papakatari yoga because I have Saturn in the 12th, and I have Rahu in the second. So my moon is hemmed in by Saturn and Rahu. So I really have a very challenging moon in this chart. I've really done a lot of work to get out of it, but and it really reflects my mom's deep suffering also. But um, um, this is called a Papatara yoga. You don't want those in the Varga charts either. So so you look for these yogas, these scissors yogas, whether hemmed in by benefics or malefics, in the Varga charts. Also, you don't want Rahu or Ketu in the 8th house in any divisional chart, or you don't want the Lord of the 8th in the 1st house in any divisional chart. So those are things that are particularly a problem in Varga charts. I talked about combustion. It carries over into the Varga charts and tends to spoil them. Okay, so I've been talking too much. I'm going to see if there's some new questions here. Okay. Okay, so we have 2 questions here. Relocation and Varga charts. I have not. My colleague Andrew Foss has the Varga charts do relocation in his program, and he thinks there is something to Vargas and relocation. I have not experienced enough of it. I know Hank Friedman's article on astrolocality, which I teach in my classes, mentions like if you move in an area, let's say you're in San Jose and you move to San Francisco, and that move is enough to change your rising nakshatra. So maybe you go from Anuradha to Vishaka or something. That is something that I have looked at and that I do experience. I have not done enough research on relocation and Varga charts. My experience with relocation is very significant if you've read my articles, but I haven't explored it enough in the Varga charts. You would think it would work. Andrew Foss thinks it works. I don't know from my experience. I'm a scientist. A lot of stuff I show you. Okay, so some of you are wanting examples of Marna Karakastana in charts. I don't have it. I have one Marka Karakastana planet in my chart. So I've got Mercury in the 4th. Mercury, the 4th house is about happiness, and it's about the mind. And so in my chart, for example, Scorpio is a water sign. I've got Moon in the 1st. I should be an emotional creature by nature, and I should be living in my emotions, but I can't go there because I've got this debilitated Moon. Moon's in Jeshta Nakshatra, which is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is Marka Karakastana. Mercury, when it's Marka Karakastana in the 4th house, is kind of saying, why it's thinking too much. It's too much in its head. It's kind of saying, why am I suffering? Why am I happiness? It moves into its head and out of its emotional nature, its heart, and so it's bringing Mercury down. So that's how it's functioning in my chart. I don't, Afi, I'm going to see if, I don't think you have any market cards. I have some people who signed up for the class, and I think that means their chart. Afi doesn't have any market kind of stuff. So let's see. I'm going to try to bring up people who've actually signed up for the class. Diane also has Mercury in the 4th house like me, so that's Marka Karakastana planet. We have to ask her if she also gets too much because Saturn's afflicting it, and so it could create too much mental worry here, and that's a problem. I don't see any other Marka Karakastana planets here. But anyway. Danny, who's also signed up for the class. Also has Mercury in the 4th house. So interesting. All of us have Mercury in the 4th house. um, and again, we explained what that does. I'm not seeing any other market card compliance here. I do have. Again, it's difficult using people's charts. Let's look at Liz Taylor and see if she has any Marca Castana planets. Saturn in the 1st. Now that's a surprise. Again, I don't know her biography really well. Here's probably a case where, again, one of the things that happens with the Navamsha chart is that about by age 36, you have to read it, or once you get married, you have to look at the Navamsha chart. So her Liz Taylor has Saturn in the 1st house in Capricorn. It has dignity, being in its own sign, so it may negate some of the Marca card. Saturn in the 1st house means, is low self-esteem. I'm not good enough, not being seen. Now, certainly that was not the case with Liz Taylor, but it may have, and she was a childhood star. I'm guessing the Marca Castana was canceled because it's in Capricorn. Let's look at some other examples. Usually you're going to have one planet that has that quality, and it may show up in the Navamsha chart, which is why I brought it up. Let's look at Jennifer Aniston. Libra rising. She also has Mercury in the 4th. Mercury in the 4th, I think, can kind of break up domestic life a little bit too. It's just, 4th house is home and stuff, but not seeing any other Marca Castana. But let's look at her Navamsha chart. Obviously, she's going to be kind of also Mercury, Marca Castana debility. I don't know her well enough to see how that's operating in her chart, so I'm not sure. But anyway, those are some examples. Okay, another question. Okay, sometimes it's hard to read these questions. So let me see. I may unmute you all too. Did I miss a question? Okay. I'm gonna do something a little bit wild here. I've got if you want to raise a live question, I have more material, but I'm gonna do it next week because I don't want to overwhelm you with Jyotish overload. But let's if you have any, okay, so Afi had a question. So I need more examples, yes. Okay, I think I gave you some examples of Mara and Karkastana, Afi. Is there any, what if there are no planets in the 1st, 5th, or 9th house and you look at the Lords? As I answered that question. Brooke had a question. Okay, there's some questions I missed at the beginning. I can't do any specific, Cheryl. You have a wonderful question here. I don't have a copy of your chart. What I do in class, if you give me permission, I do go through examples of my students' chart in class, because then I can, and that's how I don't use as many famous people. I think it's more useful to kind of bring in people's charts and say, what is your experience with this placement? And in terms of prediction, Rahu Saturn in general is kind of a difficult cycle in general. It tends to create more anxiety. Yeah, you get a dasha period hemmed in by two malefics, it's obviously going to be a problem. We just talked about that. The dasha lores in a 1-8 relationship are going to be difficult. So it sounds like relationship in a Rahu Sadhana period could be difficult. Now, it also could be transformational. Again, I don't know all the details of your chart, Cheryl. I'd have to get your chart data. But what I would say is, whenever you get 8s in a chart, it's about transformation. And transformation, eighth can mean divorce. It could be breakup of relationship. It could mean transformation. If there's enough dignity there, let's say there's some Jupiter aspects on it, let's say the Rashi chart is positive, then it may be that the period will bring deep transformation for a relationship and learning very deep things about it. So there are positive things to say about anything negative in Jyotish. People tend to get too negative in Jyotish. When we 8th house stuff in Jyotish forces us to learn meditation and to go into the mystical. If we do that, then difficult karma can be overcome. But if we haven't gotten on a spiritual path, then 8th house karma can be, can create illnesses and accidents and divorces and things like that. That doesn't have to happen. You don't want to frighten anybody ever. You have to kind of look at a zillion other factors in the chart. But good question, Cheryl. Diane had a question. I didn't answer Diane's question. Do you include the sun as a malefic on the Varga? So we'll go over that next week. I don't want to overload people, but the sun's kind of neutral. And again, for certain rising signs, it's actually, like for Sagittarius, it's quite a wonderful planet. The rule about sun being malefic, varies with the rising sign, and because the sun governs divinity and our spirituality on the deepest level, I tend to look at it more as a neutral. And in the Varga charts, I do also. And I think the general rule in the Varga charts is to look at it of a neutral. But like for Capricorn rising, it's even Capricorn rising, it's actually a good planet. Aquarius rising, it's a difficult planet. Certain rising signs are going to have some trouble with the sun as a malefic. Diane had another question. Thank you. Okay, so Jyotish is endless, as you know. I've talked way too much. I do have more material. I'm going to go over it next week for those of you who sign up for the class. I just don't want to overload anybody in the class or anybody who's anywhere. But I want to encourage you to for those of you who have taken my classes, and you can tell from this class, and I'm very specific and very detailed. I don't like to me, I don't want to ever say something's good or something's bad. It's not good or bad. There's always some deep lesson here. I mean, 8th house stuff is about transformation. Even if we end up sick in the hospital, we're there because we have to look at some area of our life. People who end up with 8th house transformations in the hospital come out and say, I've got to change my life. I've got to get out of this relationship. I've got to get out of this job. Something good comes out of it. I had a lot of 8th house karma in college. I had kidney stones for 9 months, and I was a perfect meditator. I had a good diet, went to bed on time. I was this walking time bomb, and it was a big wake-up call for other areas of my life. And eventually, it transformed my life into learning about being better at health and not listening to the doctors. The doctor said, you're going to be sick the rest of your life. There's nothing we can do. And I said, bullshit. And I went to the library. I was a PhD student. And I said, I found out I needed to take magnesium, and I transformed my health. But there was a wake-up call at work there about repressed anger. And I eventually understood it. And I eventually had to heal myself and empower myself. So even difficult things can be looked at positively, and we always have to do that in Jyotish. If we're giving readings, we always have to find a way to explain that to people, because you don't ever want to tell somebody they're going to be sick for the next year. You're going to say you need to take care of your health. You have this tendency, it could come up, but if you have a good diet and good exercise, if you do your meditation, if you chant these mantras, you're probably going to get through it okay. We always want to be positive. For those of you who, I'll stay on the line for additional questions. For those of you who don't want to take my Varga class, if you go to my website, Applied Vedic Astrology, under the webinar tab, there are some very inexpensive courses available. Sometimes they go on sale. My transit class has 2 lessons on Jaimini. For those of you who want to learn a lot of Jaimini astrology, I do have a class which is not listed here. It's called Multi-Dimensions of Reality. It's actually Finding Your Soul's Purpose. I renamed it because nobody could understand what it was. And I do go into a lot of Jaimini astrology in that course. I think it's $195, but my classes are very reasonable. I know some of my colleagues charge $1,600 or $1,000 for classes. This is my passion. I earn my income teaching, doing financial consulting for people. But my passion is teaching these classes, so that's what I do. Anyway, a lot of my classes are available in the can to watch at your own leisure, and they're very good. So if you don't want to take the Varga class, and I hope you do, you can. You might want to sign up for one of my other classes. If you are in the Varga class, we will meet next week, and we will continue with Rules of Vargas, and we will give more examples. You can sign up on my website under the webinar tab. If you need any special arrangements around payment, a lot of people are on budgets. I can offer payment plans for people who want to take the class. And I can send you a PayPal invoice for that. It's not available on the website. I do appreciate people just paying up front, but if you need a payment plan, you can email me at barry@appliedvedicastrology.com. And what else? I'm here. I'm going to unmute you all. I'm going to have a lot of static, but if you want to say anything, you're all live now to speak, and there would be a lot of the TV on in the background. Unmute yourselves, but you're welcome to ask any live questions.
Barry, will you share the PowerPoint?
I will send the PowerPoint for you. I probably will convert it to an outline. I will share the PowerPoint for you, okay?
Thank you.
Barry, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can you hit on the point you made, which has always confused me? For instance, we look at the Karaka Bhavas of each of the divisional charts. For instance, the 4th house of D4 or the 7th house of D9. And then it gets very confusing when you take the 7th lord of D9 and you take the 7th lord of D1, and then you do these techniques where they do Tulya techniques, like overlaying this on top of the other chart. And I think you kind of answered that today by saying you don't do that. But how does it make sense logically that a bhava has importance, but the bhava lord does not?
Yeah, that's a really brilliant question. I'm just one of the people that I studied with. Hank Friedman was connected to Heart of Foe, and in his lineage, they kind of de-emphasize looking at house lords in Varga charts. Other people I've studied with look at them. My experience is, logically, it doesn't make sense to get caught up in Lord of the Fourth. But you always look at the rising sign lord in the Varga chart. So the only one that matters is the Vargas. The first house, where does it go? Does it go to the 6th, 8th, or the 12th, or does it get, Digbala? Does it go into a Kendra or Klein? So focus on house placement with the first lord, and then learn all the rules for the various houses, what they mean, and then look at the Malefics influences on those houses. That's what I've learned, and that's what I try to share.
Because I think there's a lot of cheating there in hindsight. They use all these rules and then they go and adapt it based on the result they want to predict. Because you have so many variables, then you can play the game any way you want. That's what I've not liked about it, the way they use all these different house lords and place it here, place it there, and then it's pretty much playing it to your convenience if you have too many rules.
Yeah, I do try. I mean, I've seen that happen a lot. I do think it's a problem, and I try not to do it. Although sometimes you're looking for something and you can't find it, and you might come up with it. But if you look deeply enough, you'll find it someplace. For real.
Thank you. Thank you.
Barry, may I ask you this?
Yeah. Who's calling? Who's talking?
This is Kathleen.
Hey, Kathleen. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you also. I'm a cold, so apologize for my voice. I want to talk about the D30 chart, which is where all the bad juju is.
Right.
And I'm looking at mine on an app, and it's showing that Rahu and Ketu in the same house. How could that happen?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. Rahu in all the divisional charts, I think after D16. Rahu and Ketu often go in the same house. So the way to interpret Rahu and Ketu in the upper divisional charts when they end up in the same, all the rules of calculation are impossible to teach or remember, but in a lot of the upper divisional charts, Rahu and Ketu go into the same place, and it just means that there's a lot of karma in that house, in that area. Okay?
So if I have Neptune, Pluto, Rahu, and Ketu in the second house, it can't be good, right?
We don't know. We haven't rectified your chart. We haven't. People tend to get a little knowledge is dangerous. People tend to exaggerate the negative in their chart. So the D30 chart has its positive qualities too. The D30 chart, you don't want stuff in the 8th house in the D30 chart. That's where but sometimes it may only manifest in a short period. I mentioned my KT Saturn period. In when I was young, my brother electrocuted me, he pushed me down the stairs, and he drowned me. The KT Saturn in the sibling chart was pretty bad in KT Saturn, but my brother hasn't done that since.
Now, I think at one point, didn't you say you were going to show us a quick way to rectify your chart? Was it? Is that what you were referring to? A quick way to rectify your chart?
I'm going to do that in lesson 2. I can't. I need about an hour to do that. I'm going to probably send a videotape on how to rectify charts quickly.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. And again, you're still on. And there's a lot of background noise, and if you're not speaking, you can mute yourself. But if anybody wants to speak and ask a question, I'm still here.
I'm not seeing how we can take the class. It's not. Are you going to send something else so that we can take the class?
If you want to sign up for the class, if you go to, I will send out a link, obviously, to make it easy for you. If you go to the webinar, if you go to Applied Vedic Astrology, my website, you click on the webinar tab. The last class listed is the Varga class. You can click on it and then you hit buy. So I'll make that easy by sending a link. But if it may take me a day or two to get to you. So basically, go to Applied Vedic Astrology, click on the webinar tab, and then go to the bottom of the webinar tab, and it'll show the Varga class, and just click on it, and it'll go to the page for signing up. Thank you. Important question. Okay. Final Jeopardy answer is just do it. No, anyway, I love teaching these classes. Anybody who has taken my classes, Afi, Mohini, anybody want to get online and say anything about what my classes are like? It's hard to self-promote. Victoria is also online. If you want to share anything about my teaching style or what I give in my classes, that would be great. If you don't,
Hi, Barry. This is Afi. So I'll do a little promo for you. I'm a pretty honest person. Barry's extremely clear, very knowledgeable. He conveys he teaches perfectly and clearly, and he cares about his students as people. I like that about him. And he has a lot of knowledge. I've taken a lot of classes with him so far, and I'd like to continue as long as finances allows me to, because I've learned a lot from Barry. And I've taken classes from other Vedic astrologers who are experts. And let me tell you, he's also very responsive. When you email him or ask him a question, he immediately answers. He makes you feel like a person and important. So thank you for that, Barry. I really appreciate it.
thank you, Afi. I appreciate that little thing. Yeah, I've got Jupiter and Purnavasu in the 8th house with Ketu, and I just it's very dharmic for me to teach, but I'm on a Radha rising, and and I've got Moon in the 1st, so I just like to connect personally with people, and it's just something that I do, and I give too much attention. I really need to actually give more attention to my other business, but that's my current double jeopardy here at the moment. It's about 2 o'clock. I promised to let you off by 2. You're all muted at this point. Again, if you want to sign up for the class, I will send you a link if you register for the class. And if you have any questions, you can email me at appliedvedicastrology.com if you have any special needs. Anyway, look forward to. So we will meet next week. Those some of you. We have a bunch of people who have signed up already. We will meet next week. We will continue with more rules about Vargas. To get more specific. And if you're not going to be with us, I look forward to seeing you again at some other future promo. So thank you again, all. I'm going to officially end the class here. Have a great day.
Barry, one last question. Could I ask you something?
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry. I'm going to miss a few classes because I'll be on call those weekends. So can I go to your site? I mean, will you give me a Dropbox link to download the lecture then?
I should have mentioned that. Yes, all the classes are recorded and they can be replayed on Dropbox. Yes.
Oh, replayed or downloaded?
Downloaded. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Good. A good question. I did write that out someplace, but it got lost. Okay, final. Okay, so we'll see you next week. Those of you who are going to continue with us. If not, hopefully I'll see you at the conferences. You can read my books, and we'll see you somewhere on the path.